Now, the idea of recognizing the women is one way of looking at Judaism overall. Let's step out of the story for a moment and say there are evolutionary ways that we put a light on women's issues and women in Judaism, and there is a revolutionary way that we put light on women. Right? So the idea of telling the stories of women through the Torah, through the Talmud, which is a contemporary text of the New Testament, we went our way to create something called the Talmud. The Christian community went to your perspective or to their perspective of creating the New Testament and the Gospels and Jesus as the Messiah. So we kind of went two different ways in the 1st to 5th, 6th century. And that is the difference between our two traditions, right? Jesus was born, he lived, he died as a Jew. So we were kind of in the same place for the moment. There were people who followed Jesus just like they followed other rabbis. But then all of a sudden there's this, letters of Paul and a look in a whole different way. A follower of Jesus became a different tradition. Then we have Constantine in the 3rd century, and we have the reality of the Roman Empire. So it's where we kind of divided. For so long, we were very similar, just following different leaders. So looking at women and saying, we're going to pull out these women's stories. We're going to put a light on them because we've all heard about Moses. We've all heard about Abraham. We've all heard about Isaac, but we might not have heard about Shiphrah and Puah. So women went into the rabbinate in 1972, and we started saying, wait a minute, we're not going to just hear these male stories. There's all these women's stories here. We're going to put a light and shine a light. We're going to make them our role models and learn from the lessons that they teach us. Again, for better or for worse. The 5 books of Moses are not supposed to be nirvana or what everybody is perfect. On the contrary, each and every leader, whatever their gender, they are a mixture of all and both. That is what I love about Torah. It's not about being perfect. It's not about being something that no human being could be. It's about making sure that we see that even our leaders have moments of frustration. Even our leaders have to keep themselves in check. Even leaders have to say, I'm sorry, I did it wrong. It's all through the Torah. And guess what? Leaders mess up their kids all the time. So that is in the Torah over and over and over again. So that is, for me, the beauty of Torah. And that's what we're learning about women. We see that women aren't perfect. They have good and bad. Rebecca was manipulative. Rebecca was controlling. She definitely made the right decision, but did the means justify the end? It's a conversation to have and to figure out. That's a lot of what happens around leaders. Do the means justify the end? Sometimes they do, a lot of times they don't, but the end is something that actually we need. So what do we do about that? Those are ethical questions that we're always having. So putting the stories of women, that's one evolutionary change that has happened since 1972 to today. But if you stop there, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. So we have a mixed bag. We have in the Torah, we have laws and rules that other women can't do certain things, and women are excluded from a variety of different decision makers. And then we have these stories that show that no, women have been decision makers. It's a mixed bag. It's a complex set of realities. So that's one way that we look at women in Judaism. The next way, which I think is also evolutionary, I would say, and that is, we have all these prayers that refer to men all the time in Judaism. You've got a few in Christianity as well. And so we said, wait a minute, we're going to include the women in those prayers. That's like a step kind of closer to some real change, right? So we every 3 times a day, we pray 3 times a day in Judaism. And we say to our ancestors. You are so it's Baruch Atah Adonai. You are blessed, and we bless you by our forefathers. It's been for hundreds of years. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So women in the 70s and early 80s said, well, we got to add the matriarchs too. There are 4 matriarchs. So now it's just assumed in liberal places that we now include in prayer the matriarchs. So when we say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we say Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah as well. So we add that in 3 times a day. People don't even think about it. When I first came here, I added the women. And oh, by the way, I also degenderized God, because in Deuteronomy it says God isn't male or female. God isn't an animal. God isn't a bird in flight. God is above all kind of combination, or it's idolatry to begin in Judaism. It's very different in Christianity. It's idolatrous to put an image for God. God is beyond imagery. And so I got there and I decided in 1988 that I was a little naive, a lot naive. And I decided, well, it wasn't really me. Let me just say, it wasn't my idea. The senior rabbi at the time said, you're going to be a female, our first female rabbi. I think you should look at the prayers and change them to include, do whatever you have to do to be a feminist now. Go do your work. So I did. I did my work. And it was very successful with a very small group of people. So we added the matriarchs and we said God instead of Lord. We used Adonai, which is the Hebrew, and we did everything to make non-gender specific around God. But then we realized, when you say non-gender specific, you really see men. You see a male God still, because we're so conditioned. So we threw in a few female images as well next to the male images. And so all was a day. We did the work. It was all good. Well, it didn't get received in the congregation quite the best way. It's amazing I'm still here. But, people were really mad. I got a letter that said, my last name's Zimmerman. I'm going to start calling you Zimmer Woman. I was like, I like that. Come in and let's talk about that. I think that's what we're going to do. So it didn't go over so great, but as time went on, it became the norm. It wasn't, we had a whole day of learning with scholars and they were saying the same thing. And so somehow that was okay now. I wasn't just saying it, other people were saying it. And it has become a part of who we are, to the point where when we were bringing a confirmation class to New York, we went to a Reform congregation. They were still using male language and they were like, oh, this is horrible. Oh my God. What is this world coming to? I'm like, oh, yeah. So, it's interesting to see that change and pattern. So the idea of bringing now the image of God and prayer, which is kind of our daily practice, that was very much a bit closer to evolutionary. It was powerful. It had a lot of impact. And it was this moment of, okay, wow, we are going to really make a statement. And we did, and we do, and it continues. So I think those are the things that are very much a part of the, again, progressive liberal Jewish community. Not so much the Orthodox. You had a modern Orthodox Rabbi, Davis, come and speak to you. It's a little bit more fluid, modern Orthodoxy, but the Orthodox community would never accept that you would add the women and all of that. They would learn about the women in the Torah, the first section, but not the second. The other piece that women in Judaism and the change of women in Judaism has been is that there's more subtle, insidious. So, for example, the renewal of healing and the healing prayers and attention to people who are ill, people who are dying. It wasn't as at the forefront of who our movements were, but there's such a rich history in the Torah and the Talmud and the later texts about healing and being by people's bedsides and seeing that there's something beyond this world, that our bodies are the holder of our souls, but our souls never die and continue to live. And so all of that was very much influenced by bringing women into the rabbinate. Like all of a sudden, when I first came here, my male colleagues were like, we never go to the hospital. Are you kidding me? No way. And my father was a cardiologist. I grew up in a hospital, running around in the middle of dinner because we had to go to the emergency room. Like I was so comfortable in a hospital. When I gave birth to my first child, who's 33, so I've been here for 35 years, 33, the rabbi at the time, who was the senior rabbi, never came in the room. Like, I had a baby. It's nothing to be worried about. Like, just come on in and see this cute baby. So, we brought that idea of really being at the hospital and saying prayers and doing rituals around rape and incest, around difficulty bearing a child, around miscarriage. And so we had, again, this kind of expansive piece about creating new ritual and making, so again, those are all evolutionary, and it's not, you can't say women sort of, it's about women, but it's what women brought, and it's what women uncovered. Again, like I said, there's a deep, deep historic reality of healing and rabbis healing, but it went really underground for so long. And so now women kind of excavated it. Yes.
Out of curiosity, with that kind of being excavated and gaining some more prominence and stuff, are you finding sort of a patriarchal backlash, or kind of a similar backlash that you sort of found back, in the 80s when you were adding women?
Lo and behold, men die and men get sick. And they want us to be there. It's amazing how that happens.
Weird how it changes when it's personal, I guess.
It totally does. Or if you're with their spouse, and so that is really very important. I feel blessed to have been kind of on the ground of this healing piece and of the hospice movement in many ways. In this, I don't really know the history of the hospice movement, but I know that I have been, I've seen sort of the evolution of hospice care and hospice attention in the home and also hospice facilities. And so I feel very blessed to have sort of have uncovered or excavated this healing piece that's so ancient at a time where I think our culture is getting better about being with individuals who are dying and who are ill. I think we're getting better than we did before. So that's another part of having women in leadership, right? I think that's what I'm really talking about, is sort of the 1972 decision to ordain a woman really changed Judaism from these little minor pieces, or maybe they're major, to a more major piece. So we're moving to the major piece in just a moment. So I think that is really important, putting a light on the role models who are women, the lessons we learn from them, making sure that we add them in where they have been othered or absolutely not heard of or not included. And then the things that are women's ways of knowing, but it's not only women. It's so hard. I'm 63, so the feminist movement is how I grew up. It was my enlightening. And so today the feminist movement is stuck in binary perspective of gender and all of that. So I'm not quite sure how to.
I think when you intersectional feminism, you're pretty safe just referring, which means like we're all for equality of and any identification of female or whatever you sort of are. Would you like some more water? I can grab you some.
Don't worry, I'm good. Okay, good. So good. So I think let's go to gender for a moment, because I think that's also very much what has changed in Judaism is the fact that, again, rabbis and leaders are non-binary, or gender fluid, or trans, LGBTQIA, and it really is another way that I believe having women begin in the rabbinate has changed Judaism and begun to ask some basic questions, because Judaism is a tradition of law. I love law. I love law. Law has been othered in many ways. Law opposite love. It's not true. Love is law. Law is love. Because if you don't have any rules, then people can be horrible to each other. There's got to be a higher consciousness. They've got to make sure there's a super ego, that there's something towards the common good. Those are all laws, right? Because the law in Judaism is, if my ox or gores your ox, then Judaism has something to say about that. That's law, because it's really important that our animals are safe. I can't find a dog in the middle of the street and walk past it, according to Judaism. There's a whole kind of setup for what you do if you see a lost animal or a lost item, because that is trust of the common good. It is the civic responsibility that we all have to live in community. So Judaism is all about kind of those details, because when we stop doing those details, we erode the basic kind of premise of what it means to be a community. So the idea that the laws are very set in creating boundaries, so you can imagine gender boundaries. So now there's a whole nother set of kind of a lens on Judaism to say, wait a minute, the question of LGBTIQIA community wants to look at those laws and understand them differently. They want to be able to say Judaism has to be inclusive of non-binary, gender fluid individuals, that our pronouns are important. And now it's pushing Judaism even further, which is really good, because I believe Judaism is safe in any questions that we have. I believe it's strong. It's been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I don't think my questions or anyone else's questions are going to destroy it, because that would mean that I think it's fragile. It isn't fragile. It might tell me an answer I don't like, but it's not going to get destroyed by a question. Not all of my people think that, but I do. So